Hey, podcast family, welcome to the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast, the podcast that adds value to leaders who will multiply value to others. My name is Mark Cole, and I'm excited today because we're going to talk about something that everyone has, but everyone wants more of it, and that's influence. See, John Maxwell says that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And if you're going to lead others, you need to gain influence every single day. So today, John's going to begin this two-part series on how to gain more influence. Then I and my co-host, Chris Godey, will be back to discuss John's lesson and offer some ways, some ideas, some experiences in which we have had so that you can apply these principles to your own leadership. As always, we have a free fill-in-the-blank worksheet that we call our bonus resource. If you would like to fill this out as you listen to John, please go to maxwellpodcast.com/gain. Click the bonus resource button and then follow along with John. Now here is John C. Maxwell.
Let me ask you a question before I start this. How many of you would like to gain influence in your life, in the lives of others? Okay, have you got this? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out almost in a sequential pattern how to gain influencers by sharing with you how influencers influence people. And we're going to take the word influence, and I'm going to take each one of those letters and I'm going to build off of it. For example, the letter I. Are you ready? Here we go. An influencer has, the letter I, integrity with people. Now, you see, the reason I'm building the lesson the way that I am off of each letter is by the time I'm done, you will be able to know all 10 points without ever looking back at your notes, because each letter will represent the next point. And an influencer has integrity with people. Emerson was right. If we live truly, we shall truly live. I just recently read an article where they interviewed 1,300 executives, of which they asked the executives to list 5 things that they expected in people that were going up the ladder in their company. Interestingly enough, in all 1,300 of them, integrity was in all 1,300 of them. In other words, they did this all across the country, and they said, give me 5, and in that 5 somewhere, integrity was in there. In other words, every executive says you've got to have integrity or you're never going to climb this ladder. Now, watch this. What's really interesting is it was in the top 5 with 100% of the 1,300 executives. Watch this. 71% of them listed at number 1. 71% of the executives across America said the number 1 issue of anybody that's going to climb this ladder is the issue of integrity. That's why I have in your notes, do you see it? In the business world, it's acceptable to make mistakes, to lay eggs. Big ones, I've majored in those. But the Center for Creative Research in a significant study learned that one thing that sounds the death knell for those who aspire to the top rung of the ladder is betraying a trust. Virtually anything else can be overcome over a period of time, but once trust is betrayed, moving to the top of the ladder is out of the question. It is always easy to do right when you know ahead of time what you stand for. I want you to write that in your notes somewhere, would you please? It is always easy to do right when you know ahead of time what you stand for. In other words, integrity is not an issue that puts pressure on us in a crisis if we already settled the issue before the crisis. The only time we have pressure on an integrity issue is when we never settled the issue before the crisis came. I'll read it again. It is always easy to do right when you know ahead of time what you stand for. That is so key. In other words, integrity, a lot of times I've heard people tell me, they say, John, a crisis makes the character. No, it doesn't. It just reveals the character. Character's already made. I don't know what you are, but I'll tell you, whatever you are, you already are. And when the old pressure comes and it hits you, I promise you, what'll squeeze out of you is what you already determined before that crisis ever came. Integrity, number 1 of all influencers. The letter N in the word integrity, or in influence, well, it's also an integrity, come to think about it. The letter N in the word influence stands for an influencer nurtures people. Let's talk about nurturing for a moment. Influencers have the ability to nurture others. The length and breadth of our influence upon others depends on the depth of our concern for others. I want you to know, many leaders love their position more than their people. And when that happens, leaders soon lose their position. Because you know what happens? The people can tell if you really love them or not. Charles Bukowski was exactly right. Of course it's possible to love a human being if you don't know them too long. Huh? And haven't we seen that's what Charlie Brown said, I love mankind. It's people I can't stand. I heard this the other day of a mother who said, I just took my parents back to the airport. They had been visiting me for a few days. I just dropped them off the airport. She said they leave tomorrow. or when Narvaez, the Spanish patriot, he was dying. The father confessor came into Narvaez and asked him this question about his relationships. And he said, "Have you forgiven all of your enemies?" And he looked kind of astonished. He said, "Oh, Father," he said, I have no enemies. He said, "I have shot them all." already wiped them out. Already wiped them out. Nurturing, note this, few leaders love their people more than their position, and when that happens, leaders strengthen their position. Notes on nurturing. Letter A. Nurturing people does not mean needing people. So when I talk about a nurturing atmosphere of a leader, I'm not talking about you need them, you have to have, that's codependency, that's unhealthy. And I've said many times, you've heard me say this, you can't lead people if you need people. Okay, letter B. Nurturing people does mean commitment to people. What nurturing means is, not that I need them, but that I'm committed to them. And love will find a way, but indifference will always find an excuse in relationships. Always has, always will. Letter C. Nurturing people does mean loving people. Nurturing people does mean loving people. Henry Drummond. You will find as you look back upon your life that the moments when you have really lived are the moments when you have done things in a spirit of love. And letter D, nurturing people does mean lifting people to a higher level. Now that's what I'm speaking about, nurturing, an atmosphere that allows people to grow. Influencers, we've learned two things about an influencer. An influencer does two things. One, has integrity with people. Number two, nurtures people. Okay, you ready for the F? An influencer has faith in people. An influencer has faith in people. They have a high belief system in the people that are around them. Every man is entitled to be valued at his very best moments. I learned a long time ago, assets make things possible and people make things happen. And you can have all the assets in the world, but if you don't have the people around you and the belief in them, then you're going to be in trouble. Okay. In leading others, there are three feelings that we cannot possess. One is fear, two is dislike, and three is contempt. If we are afraid of people, we cannot handle them. If we dislike people, we shouldn't lead them. And if we look down on people, we will not respect them. How true that is. Les Giblin, an authority on human relations, says that our actions must be genuine. You can't make the other fellow feel important in your presence if you secretly feel that he's a nobody. Now let's talk about that for just a second, because what I find is a lot of people come to me, and because they're not good on the inside, they're not right on the inside, they have results that they don't care for and that kind of confound them. They'll come to me and they'll say, "John, I'm doing this, I'm going through these motions or I'm taking these actions, and yet I'm not getting the outcome." Here's what I usually find. If you're doing things right on the outside, but you're not getting the right results, it's because there's something wrong on the inside. And what you're doing is you're sending signals to people that are not backing your words. And they can read it. They can intuitively feel it. And they know when you really are sincere. And they know when you're like the expression that I hate is fake it till you make it. But what I say is be remade. Quit faking it. Because what happens is that's where we lack not only integrity, but that's what also happens is people can tell when you really do believe in them. There's a whole new level that people rise to once they understand that you truly do believe in them. And I have found in my life that the reason I get such good positive results from people is because I believe people have great value. I respect them highly. I believe that they want to contribute to life, and they can just read that in me. It just bleeds through, and so therefore they respond accordingly. So that's why we've got to always go on the inside. Remember this, whenever there are outside problems, it's because there's something on the inside that's not right. And it's always an inside issue. It's very, very seldom an outside issue. I learned a long time ago, you get the inside right, the outside comes out fine. But the inside has to be right. And faith in people, true faith and belief in people, is one of the real essentials in influencing. Okay, the letter L. An influencer listens to people. And I want to talk to you a little bit about listening because it's so key in leadership and influence. Paul Tillich said that the first duty of love is to listen. So this is some good stuff on listening. And in your notes here, I have a quiz for you to take. Are you a good listener? Number one, do I allow the speaker to finish without interrupting? Just go ahead and help yourself. Number two, do I listen between the lines for the subtext? In other words, for what really they're saying. Number three, do I actively try to retain important facts? Number four, when writing a message, do I listen for and set down the key facts and phrases? Number five, do I repeat the details of the interview to the subject in order to get everything right? Number six, do I avoid getting hostile or agitated when I disagree with the speaker? Don't worry, I'm not going to ask for scores. I can tell some of you are already breaking the records. Number seven, do I tune out distractions when listening? Or maybe a better way to put that, am I a distraction when listening? Number eight, do I make an effort to seem interested in what the other person is saying? Those are good questions, aren't they? 8 of them. Just kind of help you on your listening checkup. Okay, good stuff.
Hey, welcome back. As John was teaching today, I thought of Ken Blanchard's quote. He says, the key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. And so today, Chris, as you and I get to unpack this powerful word that John has really popularized in his definition of leadership. That's leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And here we are now. John's going to take us on a 2-week journey on the acrostic of influence. And I tell you, just in the first 4 points, I'm sitting here and going, man, I've got a lot of work to do. Yeah. I've been with John for 21 years, but I've got a lot of work to do. And here we go. That's what the point of the podcast is.
That's it, right?
Work to do.
I think you and I probably learn as much as some of our listeners out there do by just going through this together with our team and this content. The first thing I thought about is, I'm extremely passionate about the 5 levels of leadership is what we call it now, but back when John created it in Developing the Leader Within You, the chapter was, or the model was, the 5 levels of influence. Yeah. And as I thought about what he was talking about right here, there's so many competencies that fit into that model. And I, as well as you, were like, I got some work to do. The first thing I want to talk about is, as we jump in, is I hope you, maybe if you're driving, don't do it while you're driving, but I hope you go back and listen and write down what John said, which was, it's always easy to do right ahead of time when you know what you stand for. And we're going to jump in and talk about this first one in integrity. And I wrote that down as I was sitting here and we were listening to it, because I think you and I have seen, and many people that are listening have seen, many leaders that don't have integrity, that have incredible talent, kind of fizzle out. And John even says, man, 71% of the executives in a survey said, man, one of the biggest issues of climbing the ladder is having integrity if you want to do it. And then if you're going to fall short, it's because you don't have integrity. Man, you've seen a lot of leaders, organizations around the world with John, but also internally. Talk a little bit about the importance of that word for you in leadership and even in your leaders and what that looks like around the John Maxwell enterprise.
So I love this, and truly we could forget that John covered 3 other points, and we could camp out right here on integrity. I think it's so important. And most of you in podcast land know I've had 2 great opportunities to work for 2 great leaders, my father and then John Maxwell, and kind of was tasked or picked to carry the legacy of both. And one, I focused a lot more on external leadership, image, what people thought of me in my younger attempt to lead, and then more importantly, recently, to focus on the inside. And I'll come back to that because I have a resource I want to point everybody to in just a moment. But I'm sitting here with integrity, and I do think it comes into having the foresight of knowing what you want to be known for and then leading to that point.
That's a good point, yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you and I love sports. We're not big Tom Brady fans, but that's another conversation. Recently in the playoffs, I was watching Tom Brady, the Buccaneers, pick apart yet another team. I won't say them for some of our friends and podcast family from that city. But the commentators were talking about, they had an interview that week with Tom Brady, and he said, I always know where I'm going to throw the ball before I touch it. So he previews the defense. He knows the game plan of what he called in the huddle. He may make some adjustments, but he already knows where he's going with the ball before he says hike, and the center puts it in his hands. Now, let's take that analogy from one of the greatest, if not the greatest. Yes, you heard me say that. One of the greatest in his profession of football. He knows where he's going to throw it before he touches the ball. What if we as leaders knew what kind of leader we wanted to be before we started leading?
Yeah.
And as we started leading?
Yeah.
Before we got the ball for the next assignment, what if we already envisioned the integrity with which we wanted to lead and how we wanted to be perceived?
Yeah.
So coming back to that, Chris, for me, again, 2 opportunities to lead. It's been a much more sustainable and less pressurized journey to know how I wanted to lead from the inside on this second opportunity than it was on the first opportunity, where I was figuring it out as we go. There was no integrity on the first one. It is trying to build it completely on integrity, the second one. So how does a leader do that?
Yeah.
I'll take you to a book that I read before my first opportunity and a book I read before my second opportunity. It's the first John Maxwell book that I read. Happened to have it with me in the studio
Look at
today,
that.
which is Developing the Leader Within You. This is, in my opinion, we all have our favorites out of John's 86 books. In my opinion, this is the most impacting book of any leader that is taking on a new assignment. And in my opinion, this book is all about the inside of leadership, the inside of a leader, and therefore it's about integrity. And I just couldn't pass this up by looking at all of you at the beginning of 2022 and saying, when is the last time you've read this book? Yeah. And if you haven't read this book, to go, what? You don't even know John Maxwell if you haven't read this book, because really Developing the Leader Within You 2.0 is one of John's favorite books. And Chris, as you know, we have a digital product along this book. It's John teaching 10 lessons, 15 to 20 minutes, fill in the blank notes. It's stuff you can pass on to your team. It's a digital product. And Jake, I want to give them a discount to take advantage of that. We'll give you a 20% discount, Jake, make that happen. And you can go to the show notes, and we'll have the link there. And when you go to that link, obviously put in the keyword podcast, and we'll give you a 20% discount. But again, back to this idea of integrity. I really do believe, I'm so glad John started with this, because again, this is my first Maxwell book. I read it, I consumed it, I loved it, forgot about it. And this time, Chris, I read this, if not once every year, once every 2 years. I consume it. I teach from it all the time. And the person that I teach the most about this content is myself.
I love it.
Because it's who we are.
Yeah, and if you're unfamiliar with the 5 levels of influence I mentioned, man, it is in the first chapter of that book right there. And as Mark mentioned, as you begin to think about your leadership journey and where you want to go, not only personally, but even just professionally in the organization, man, that integrity's got to be there. And I love what you talked about with Tom Brady, which for both of us and some of our team members is not sitting well for us to talk about this on a podcast. But the problems that he encounters after the snap of the ball do not matter to him.
No.
Because if you have integrity, you're equipped for the challenges ahead. You know the decisions you're going to make. And leaders, we're going to face challenges. Yeah. We know that. We've all been through 24 months of challenges. There have been challenges before that. There will be challenges ahead of us.
Let me say one more thing on that, because we talked about sports. We're obviously in a leadership podcast, business podcast. John tells the story of one of the most scariest times he's ever traveled on a plane, and he got down, and right as they were landing, the wind shear hit. That's happened to a lot of us. I can tell you my 1 or 2 times of losing everything I had in an experience like that. He said that plane popped on the ground because the wind shear popped it, and immediately that pilot pulled it back up. When they got off, he hugged the pilot and he said, man, how did you figure out? How did you know? When did you make the decision to pull that back up? He said, I made that decision 20 years ago. In training, I learned over and over again, wind shear hits, it's safer for a plane in the air than on the ground in a bunch of chaotic wind. Good. And so we as leaders, hey, make the decision today what you're going to do in the next challenge. For us, 2020, infamous leading through COVID, we made a decision many, many years ago, we're going to value people. So when COVID hit, we made all of our decisions not based on how many millions was at risk, how many millions could be lost, on how many lives could be impacted and added value to by making the decision this way or that way. And we made that decision a long time ago. So people say, man, when did you make the decision to cancel IMC, a $6 million risk decision that we made? Oh, we made that years ago when we decided we were going to add value to people.
Yep. You know, before we move on real quick, because to your point, we could talk about this first topic the whole time. One of the things in addition to making decisions and solving problems, one of the things that John talked about in there, I don't want you to miss this, is that when you lead with integrity, you have that trust. And as we think about our engagement level in organizations, as we think about our teams being engaged, one of the things that really stands out to me is that 81% of team members say that their leader is why they're engaged, but the reason why they're engaged is because they trust their leader. Yeah. The only way they're going to trust you, the only way we're going to trust each other, peer-to-peer leader, is that if we have integrity and we live out that on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. Well, let me move on. There's a couple more points you and I talked about, and that I just want to go into. John talks about an influencer nurtures people. Now, when we hear the word nurturing, we don't necessarily think of a leader right away, do we? Right? Yeah. This is we use the word soft, and that may come across to you as I don't want to be a nurturing leader. It's not easy, by the way. It may be soft, but it is not easy. And John goes on to say, man, it does mean a commitment to your people. It does mean loving your people. And I will tell you this: that as long as you and I have worked together and worked with John, there is no doubt that he nurtures as a leader to those that are on his team and in his influence. Talk a little bit about, from your perspective as a leader, the importance of that. Again, I'm air hashtagging right here, nurturing of people.
You got it. First of all, let me say this to all you podcast listeners. Yeah. You need to jump on YouTube and kind of check out the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. YouTube search it, and you'll find us. You've got to see how nurturing it feels to see Chris Godey use air
in a pink shirt, but it's February.
It's
right?
February.
So we're
Happy Valentine's Day to you, Chris.
Right.
So this has been more pronounced to me in John Maxwell's leadership over the last 2 or 3 years than at any other time. I wouldn't have started 21 years ago and said, man, that John Maxwell, he's a nurturing leader.
Right.
Now, he's always been a valuing people, loves everybody. Everybody feels welcome. You don't work for me, you work with me. He says nurturing things in his sleep. I mean, he's just great at it. But it has really become obvious to me, Chris, over the last 3 years when he first found his word for the year to be Father. And there is this pride. John wrote me a card over the holidays. He in his year-end review, he kind of writes cards based on impact moments that he had. He then pulls out a note card right in the impact moment and writes a thank you note. It's a brilliant idea. I'm going to teach on it in a podcast because I'm going to steal it because it's a great idea. I got one of those, and I just opened it this weekend. Been traveling, just opened my mail, and had this thing from John, and he said, my most proud thing I've done this year is to watch you do your thing. He said, of all the things that we've accomplished, and 2021 was a great year for all of us, Chris, including you and your team. He said, of all the things I'm proud of all the things that just made me swell with pride and thanksgiving, it was watching you lead to the next level. Now, I don't believe those were just nice words. I think that was the nurturing father side of John Maxwell. This was real pronounced to me just an hour before walking in the studio. John and I are doing a consulting arrangement with a group from Mexico, Zifra, powerful leaders. These young people are fired up, and they're asking these questions of John and I. And John's going to throw one or two of them my way, and so I'm ready, and I go gangbusters with my answers. I mean, I'm just like this. My YouTube family, I'm just like this. I mean, I'm fired up, ready to go. And John just kind of pauses, and there's this love and this thing, and you're going, number one, his answers are always good, but number one, you don't even have to answer correctly. I just feel a warm embrace right now.
Yeah.
One was asking, how do I stop failing and disappointing people around me? And I've got 3 reasons and why passion is going to do it. And John just slows down, and it's less about his words than it is about his demeanor. And leaders, if I could help you,
so good.
and I could help me,
good.
if I could help me right here, if you will nurture with your persona, with your attitude, with your presentation, it'll go further and last longer than your wise, passionate words. And I'm still learning that. I'm not a nurturing leader. I have this hard charge. If I can fire you up, we're going to get it done.
Yeah.
And John just goes, man, if I can make you believe in yourself, you're going to get it done.
Yeah, and when you were just talking about that, I was like, man, I know that I tied that to a comment he made. And even in your show notes here, he says nurturing people does mean lifting people to a higher level, right? There's a lot of complexity that comes to lifting your people to a higher level. But even in just that illustration of him answering that question by slowing down and understanding, hey, you're not always going to get approval from people. You're not going to make them happy and then just talk through that from a demeanor. You lift people up.
Yeah, and let me say this. In leadership, and I'm not talking to you as a mom over your family or a dad working through a troubled teen. I'm talking about in leadership, and that has elements of leadership. There's a big difference in nurturing and enabling.
Yes.
And many leaders feel like if I nurture, then I am enabling you or empowering you to less than. Yeah. And that's not true. Back to your quote of John. Nurturing is continuing to lift them to a higher level, but it's not kicking them in the butt to do it. It's lifting them from the heart to do it.
Totally agree. Hey, one thing I thought about here as well, when John talks about that nurturing does mean loving people, one of the things that you and I are extremely excited about is our League of Extraordinary Leaders.
Yeah.
And Joel Manby, a powerful executive in the corporate world, has actually partnered with us and just done a off of his book, a digital content called Love Works. And we went back and forth and we said, do we include that word in the title? And we said, man, absolutely we have to, because that's just part of leading people. And so it's he puts together 7 principles of better way to lead and to love your people. And so that's in the show notes. There's a link there. That's coming out in February. Again,
and didn't you say there's like 8 components that he does?
There's 9. There's 9 video sessions, but 7 principles.
Yep.
Got to check it out. It'll go along with my pink shirt celebrating Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. Love does work. Love works at work, and love will work in your relationship. So proud of that. Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely. Last point here, and we're going to wrap it up, but this is probably something we need to talk about before we wrap up. We were talking right before we got on the air here, and Jared Cagle, an incredible part of our team, was saying, hey, that whole nurturing, and then John's last point of to being able to listen to people, to gain influence, or to be an influencer, man, there's such a direct connection. And here's what I was thinking about. To validate his point was you just gave us an example of John sitting on that phone call when you guys are mentoring and consulting with this organization. And, man, he's just sitting there listening, and he's soaking it all up. And he says in here, he gives us, I think there's 8 questions to do a little self-assessment. By the way, I don't know about you, but the longer we have led, the longer we've been around, the more unaware we become of our listening skills. Now, if Stephanie and Sarah, our spouses, were here, we would lose the mics right here, and we would talk a lot about them, knowing that we hear them, we don't really listen to them.
We would actually have a technical glitch because Jake would help us out right here and cut it off.
Yeah, but I just want to get transparent here for a minute, and I want to say, man, these questions are powerful, and you and I admitted that we learned a lot from these lessons from John, even in our leadership and being around for John over 20 years. There's 8 here. I have an answer of which one I struggle with the most, but I'd love to hear from you. When you look through this, I want you to talk a little bit about the 2 that you struggle with and why.
So only 2?
Yeah. Only because you and I narrowed them down from 8 to 6, and I got to the 2.
Probably, Chris, as I look at the 8, and there really are several that we talked about pre-recording, but do I repeat? It's number 5 in the list in your show notes. And again, let me challenge all of you watching or listening. You want to go get these show notes that our team prepares for you. It'll help you consume the content better. It'll help you share the content with others. But number 5 in the notes says, do I repeat the details of an interview or a conversation in order to get everything right? And I can tell you, that's not even 25% of the time. 1 in 4 times, I'm not sitting here repeating it to make sure I got it, because it seems like such a waste of time. We're adults. Number 1, I feel like I insult your intelligence if I go, now what I heard
active
you
listening,
say
like we all
is,
learned, right?
Yeah, and we've heard active listening, but in a professional setting and all that, and even in a personal setting, back to if Sarah and Stephanie were here. But I really don't do that. And I don't do that well. And what happens many, many times is I am responding to my interpretation, not to their intention.
That's good.
And I really do challenge myself after listening to this and after you asking this question and us agreeing to have this vulnerable conversation here. I really do think that repeating back before responding, my challenge is twofold. 1 is I think I insult your intelligence.
Yeah.
2, I think that it wastes time, and I don't have much time.
Right. Get on with it.
But 3, I think that I will forget my wonderful response on the fly. And I probably need to forget some of my wonderful responses on the fly, because half of them feel like they were on the fly.
Yeah.
And so I think by repeating it before I form an answer, because I'm telling you, halfway through your question, I'm already forming the answer to what I think you're saying. And every leader does that. And if you don't, you do too. I'm just telling you.
They're just not admitting
halfway through your question, I'm forming my answer. And if I will wait to form my answer when I make sure that we are settled on your point or your question, I promise you, my response will be better, more relevant, and you will accept it more because I listened and repeated back.
Yeah, that's good.
The second one would be number 6. Do I avoid getting hostile or agitated when I disagree with the speaker? And I did that. I had to pick that one because you mentioned Stephanie being in the studio with me. Because when I know that I'm right, which is all the time, when I am confident that I am right and I can't move people enough, it's not that I disrespect their answer, their position, or how much love I have for them. It's I disrespect how much time that it's going to take for us to get on the agreement. It's not fair. It's not right. It's terrible. It's confession time. I'm done. I need to go see my pastor or my priest, whatever. I got to go get some help right here.
Well, I'm sorry, Mark. We ran out of time. I can't share mine after that. So we're good. No, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think so many of us, each of these 8, right, if we're being honest with ourselves, we need to go to work on these. And remember, we're talking about how do we gain influence. And John says, here's 8 great questions around listening. For me, it's really the second one, which is, do I listen between the lines for the subtext? Mm-hmm. A lot of times I'll take at face value what is being said. I'm very logical, kind of very concrete. And what are they trying to tell me? Am I listening in a way to be curious enough to understand their side of their perspective of where it's coming from? Because we would probably communicate it a little bit differently, and I don't think I do a good enough job with that. And so Mark and I were just convicted by these questions, and so we wanted to share that with our listeners. Man, we're so grateful. I'm going to throw it back to you to let you wrap us up and finish today's lesson.
Well, here's the standout statement that we want to leave you with today. The best way to influence people is to value them. And we're talking about influence, 4 points this week, 6 points next week. And we're really wanting to dig deeper into this concept. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So how do we influence? And the best way to influence is start by valuing people. Start by taking that moment. There's a very relevant episode that we've done that I want to direct you to. It's in your show notes. It's called Your Influence Inventory. do a checkup. Go back and listen to that podcast this week and do a checkup on how you're doing in your influence quotient and how you can grow that and become more influential. I'm reminded of a listener comment that we got. This is incredible, from Laura. Laura talked about the episode goal conscious versus growth conscious. She said, we can choose to go back towards safety or forward toward growth. Today, I choose to get better and grow in every area of my life. Sustainable development is the pathway to the future we want for all. So today, I will start reading my book. Small wins, small steps help us achieve our goals. Let's focus on growth and everything else will fall in place. If you know Laura and she's a listener to the podcast, ask her if she's still reading that book. Thank you, Laura. Thanks all of you. Hey, Chris, can't wait for next week.
Yeah.
I love this journey of influence. I love this journey of leadership. It's Valentine's Day, so there's a lot of love. We love all of you that watch us on YouTube, all of us that listen, and we love you even more, if that's possible. We love you even more when you send us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. We love you even more when you forward this podcast to others so that they too can be impacted. Until next week, let's listen, let's learn, let's love, then let's lead.